My parents met around Boston in I think probably 1966 or something. My father is English, but he came to the US in 1950 as a young boy after World War II, and his father died in World War II. So my grandmother, my father's mother, moved with her 3 children to the US. And when she moved, she brought along a few things that were of sentimental value. And amongst those things were some programs from Sadler's Wells Ballet, because she was a big ballet fan. And she had gone to see the ballet with her husband. My grandfather, who passed, was a musician. He was a violinist. And he played with the BBC Philharmonic, and he was a lover of ballet, but I think even more so my grandmother loved ballet. Once my father moved with his 2 sisters and his mother to the US, I don't think he ever saw ballet again until he was much older. My mother was never trained in ballet. She did music. I think she might have done a couple modern dance classes, but she was more exposed to contemporary dance when she went to university. And she did a course offered by Twyla Tharp for 1 semester. So that will come back into my life many years hence. But they met around Boston, and I have 2 sisters. I'm in the middle, and we all did ballet at various times in our life. At one time, we were all in the production of The Nutcracker together in Boston. It wasn't foreign. My parents had known about it, but neither of them had ever done ballet themselves. They're both school teachers, so they don't have an artistic background, so to speak. I think my mother knew that we were all active, and she could see that we liked to move around. And my mother does remember that when she was at university and she had the semester with Twyla Tharp, that the dancers who seemed the most prepared were the ones who had had some ballet. So my mother thought that even if we went into another type of dance, if we wanted to, it would be good to have a ballet foundation. And I think that's what made her put us into a ballet class. So at age of 4, I started into a very small school in very close to where my father taught at an elementary school. And it was in the basement of someone's apartment, basically. It was very, very relaxed. It was incredibly casual. But I enjoyed it a lot, and we got a lot of compliments from the teacher, so I thought it was wonderful. Oh, I don't know, probably did maybe once a week or twice. It was not very serious. But my good friend had started taking class at the Boston Ballet School, which was a much bigger institution, an established school, and I think my parents thought maybe I would like to do that. I don't quite remember the genesis of how that occurred. I don't even remember the audition explicitly, but I was accepted. But it was not a very rigorous process at that point. They needed to have pupils, so I was accepted into the school. And it was much more strict. I wasn't complimented all the time, and I didn't like it. And I remember telling my father that I wanted to quit. And he said, well, we paid through to Christmas, so can you stay until Christmas? At that point, I was only 6 years old when I started at Boston Ballet School, so it was still just primary ballet. It was like running and skipping or learning how to do chassé. It was very rudimentary, and it was not, at that age, they don't offer a diversification of types of dance. They do that once you're older, but first it's just rudimentary rhythm and coordination. The first performance I saw was the Alvin Ailey Company. They came to Boston yearly. They came to the Wang Center, which is a very big theater. It was originally a movie theater, so it seats almost, I think, 3,500 people or something like that. And we were way up in the balcony. But I absolutely loved it. And I remember Revelations really clearly. And I just remember the energy and the entire audience standing up and clapping. And I just thought it was phenomenal. I loved it. So that was the first dance performance I saw. And I absolutely loved it. I don't think I saw the Nutcracker until I was in the Nutcracker. And the first time I was in the Nutcracker, I was 8 years old. So I never saw a live ballet performance until I was in the ballet performance. And even then, I don't think I ever watched out front. I think I was always involved in it. The Boston Ballet School used a lot of the children in the performance of the company. I went to academic school for 6 hours a day, 6.5 hours, and I did all high school completely normal too. I didn't have any special exceptions. I didn't leave school early. I didn't do any correspondence. I didn't do any homeschooling. I did a normal day like all of the students, and I prepared academically as if I were going to go to college, to university. So I applied to 8 universities. I was completely on track to follow an academic career if I decided, because I had already decided I wanted to be a dancer, but my parents did say, you must still apply to university because you never know what could happen. And I'm very glad I did, because that's very true, and I think it's incredibly important to have a very good academic background. And I think a lot of schools don't offer even a decent academic background. It's not enough to do like a degree in dance. That means, I think, nothing to the actual world that we live in. Dance is a real microcosm, and we believe in it, we're passionate about it, but we have to understand that it's a real microcosm. Yeah, so I would do academics, and then at ballet we would have class from 4 to 6:30, or sometimes 4 to, I think maybe once in a while we went till 8:30, but at night, and then get home and do homework. So oftentimes I didn't get to bed until 1:30 or 2, and once a week I had honors chemistry, which started at 7 a.m. and I had to walk to school. So it was difficult. I worked probably harder than ever during that time, and I would leave high school after it finished at 2:30 and take the train into ballet school. My teacher, who was from St. Petersburg, Tatiana Nikolaevna Legat, was brought to the Boston Ballet School when I was probably about 12, and maybe 11 or 12, and I started having her intensively at age 13. She taught the top level, and I was in the top level for 4 years, for all of my 4 years of high school. And I think the director of the company thought it would be good for me to do the competition. And I think it was, because I got to work with her intensively on 6 different solos. And then I was also that year a Presidential Scholar in the Arts, which also involved performing solos. And that involved performing at the Kennedy Center in June, which was simultaneous with the U.S. International Ballet Competition, which was in Jackson, Mississippi, and that was also in June. So I actually had to fly from the ballet competition to the White House and do the reception and the performance, and then fly back for round 2 of the competition, and then round 3. I didn't win. I was a finalist, but I didn't win. But then the following year, I went to the International Ballet Competition in Nagoya, Japan, and I won silver, and Alina Kojikaru won gold. And that was my first year in the company, so that was when I was 17, turning 18. I didn't see any reason at that point to not be there, because it had I admired so greatly some of the principal dancers, most particularly Larissa Ponomarenko, and I admired my teacher, and I admired ballet master and mistress Sergei Berezhnoy and Tatiana Tirakova, and it seemed like a really good place for me to grow, and I was given opportunities very much right away. The director had known me since I was probably 6 or 7 years old. So I mean, it was, I could see it as the easy thing to just stay in, but I didn't feel like it was a complacent move on my part. I felt like it was a good place for me to start my career. A couple of years later, I did audition, think about going to another company. I joined the company at 17, but when I left when I was 23, I would say that once I was promoted to principal, my first like full-length ballet was La Fille Margaret. I did with Carlos Acosta, who came to a guest with us. And we had 4 shows in a row. We had a Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night, and Saturday night. And it was the first time I ever did a full-length ballet. So that was a lot of work, but I was so young and I just thought it was brilliant, and it was really incredible. And then I was promoted right after that. So things were changing and personnel was changing and the coaching was changing in Boston, and I wanted to have experience somewhere else, and I wanted to have the kind of coaching where I knew that I would get to improve every day and really have a focus on artistry and have a repertoire that was really diverse, and to have much more exposure on stage and international exposure. And so that's why I decided to find another place. And of course there was always an insinuation of possibly nepotism in the fact that I had been from Boston and I had gone to the school, and then I was, was I just living one life in one place? And I didn't want that to be how I was judged. I wanted to be judged on my own abilities and my own merits, and I didn't want it to be seen as just the local girl is here to stay. I remember I flew here to London. I took one day off work, so I flew Thursday evening and I arrived here Friday morning, and from Heathrow came in and took class. And I remember being in the Fontaine studio and looking at the white wall with all those small holes in it and the pixelation. I remember just being completely jet lagged or really out of focus. And I asked Monica not to watch me until the next day. And I think she did come and watch me a bit on Friday, but on Saturday I remember she and Janetta came in and watched class. And right after class, Monica offered me a position of first soloist. And then I flew that afternoon, late afternoon, to the National Ballet. Yeah, Dutch National Ballet. And the next day they had class on Sunday because they were in the theater, and I took class on Sunday, and then I was also offered a position, but that was basically a principal position. Definitely making a transatlantic move was a big deal, but I don't think because I grew up with a father who was British and my mother's family was Canadian, so it's not like I grew up in the middle of Oklahoma driving a tractor. So it's not like I'm an American in a sense that I was not used to a cosmopolitan lifestyle, and there was a lot about America that I think is surpassed culturally in Europe, because there is a foundational a government foundation for artistic appreciation. There's an expectation that culture is actually part of civic life, whereas in America it's treated as an extra, and it's treated as a completely philanthropic individual decision. If you want to give money to watch something, or to have a museum, or to have a concert, you're free to do that, but it's not something that should be given to the public. So that schism is something that I was very aware of, and I thought it would be really interesting to be part of a European system where when you said I'm a ballet dancer, people didn't say, oh, so does that mean you work at a coffee shop as well? It was actually, that's a recognized profession rather than something that I do on the side for, you know, dollar bills or something. They don't quite understand. So making the decision between going to Dutch National or coming here to the Royal, that was really difficult, because was I going to be taking a demotion, and would that change the trajectory of my career forever if I were to become a first soloist and never do principal roles again? And of course it was very tempting to go to Dutch National and remain a principal and do wonderful repertoire, which they had and still have. But then here they have absolutely wonderful repertoire and the stature of, you know, the Royal Ballet. And then again, all the, you know, the programs from Sadler's Wells that I looked at when I was young that my grandmother had brought, you know, she brought very few things over with her, and she had those. So I spoke to my teacher, Tatiana Nikolaevna, and she said, Sarechka, обязательно London, which means you know, it's absolutely, you must go to London. So I must admit, I think that was what pushed it over the edge, and I did take the harder decision, because it was the decision that required more humility, and for me to say, okay, you know, I can probably learn more, and you know, maybe this is what I need to do. And luckily within 6 months I was doing Odette Odile here, so I do think I made the right decision. And within the first month or two I was already doing Thais Pas de Deux, which was a principal role in one of the first mixed programs. So I had, you know, but then again I was doing Lisa's Friends in Female Garde when, you know, a year and a half before I was doing Lise with Carlos Acosta. So there were trade-offs, and yeah, it was hard, but I felt welcomed eventually. People aren't, you know, as effervescently welcoming and ebullient as an American company would be. You know, there's no automatic hi and a hug. You know, people are a little bit more wary, and they'll sort of observe you a little bit before they start talking. In America, there is each contract is, you know, maybe for 40 weeks, 45 weeks. It's never a full year contract. And only when I was actually just leaving had they started even introducing a vacation pay clause to the contract. So it's basically a partial year contract, and then you must go on unemployment, and you file for unemployment because that's sort of the system. And you can look at it and think, well, that's not really correct, because then this is an arts foundation or a non-profit who's then using the government to subsidize their dancers when they don't feel, or when they're not able, or whatever, to pay them. Whereas here, it's a full year contract. You're paid for your vacation. You have, once you pass your 6-month trial period, you're on a permanent contract. That's a huge difference. And then I think most of the larger ballet companies in the US have health insurance part of their contract, but a lot of them don't. Whereas here, you know, you have national insurance. And besides that, with our injuries, we have we have doctors, and we have access to physiotherapies, and we have all of that. So there's a huge difference in security, absolutely. And again, as I meant, a cultural status, a cultural understanding that you are doing a job, and that you have put in years of training and years of diligence for that, and it's not some sort of amateur excursion. Whereas in America, that was more of the idea of what a ballet dancer is. I started here in September, and in May I was dancing Odette Odile. So in terms of being given a principal role early, that was quite quick. And it was phenomenal for me, because the last role I did in Boston was 1 year previously, and that was Swan Lake. and that was actually exactly a year, because it was in May that I did Swan Lake in Boston, and then it was May that I did Swan Lake here, and I was also in Symphonic Variations around the same time. So I was doing so much more already from what I would ever have been doing in Boston, because the way that the company works there is you must do many performances of Nutcracker to get in revenue, because ticket sales are a huge part of their total income, whereas that's not the way it is at the Royal Opera House and most European companies. This is not, ticket revenue is not the bulk of, or even half of, what the total income is. I think a lot of people were thinking, oh, you might be promoted because you've done Swan Lake, and I wasn't sure. I think I, of course, wanted to be promoted. Of course, I wanted to be a principal again. But in the end of the season, right after Swan Lake, Monica said, I'm not going to promote you yet because it's too soon. So I was a little bit upset about that, but I was still doing the work of a principal, so that didn't matter to me as much as possibly it would have if, I wasn't doing any great roles. And the next year I was cast in Johann's new La Sophie, and so I was still getting a lot to do, and Sleeping Beauty the next year. So a year and a half after I joined, I was promoted. I was promoted after Sleeping Beauty, which was the next May, so the following May. After Monica promoted me after Sleeping Beauty on stage, right after we finished the Red Runners, I was so happy, and I was dancing with Slava Samadorov, and he was so happy for me. And with my husband, we went out to dinner and had a little celebration. And my parents were at the graduation of my younger sister from university, so I called them, and they were, really happy. I think my mom started crying, and I was really ecstatic. But the next day you go in and you're still being judged every day. It's not like you're a principal and then you just get to chill out. For me, the way my mind works, and I think the way every principal works, is we get here because we've worked really hard, and we have something in us that drives us even when there's no, like ringing bell to follow, like a little dog. It's not that we follow something literal. We're following something that is a larger idea of an abstract of perfection. We know we're never going to reach it, but we're always trying to get there. So you can call me a principal, you can call me a principal plus or a principal plus plus. That doesn't matter. Like, it's not like it works in some sort of achievement zone of each echelon somehow making me work harder or thinking differently of myself. I'm honored to be a principal and very happy to be, but you're never comfortable. There's always expectation, and I think the most expectation is from oneself to be even better. And I think going from first soloist to principal, that's also a difficult thing, because when you're first soloist, you're doing a principal role, and you always feel like, well, I'm still just a first soloist, so I'm doing this. And now you have a feeling of, I'm a principal, so I must be doing this, like, to the highest degree. And even though that possibly is contradicting what I said earlier about always having your own critic, your own internal critic, and your own internal standards, there is almost more pressure when everyone is expecting you to be living up to this title. I had a very big injury at the beginning of the season in 2008, so I was coming back from our summer break. My mother-in-law had just passed. It was quite a difficult time. My husband was still in California following the funeral, and I was back here in London starting to rehearse Manon. And I had a terrible collision with my partner on a slide at the end of the bedroom pas de deux. And this step is quite infamous by now because a number of people have been hurt in it. I unfortunately had a really terrible injury. I broke the Liz Frank joint, which is the arch support joint in the foot, as well as I broke 3 metatarsals in my left foot. And immediately, as after the collision, I just tried to rip my point shoe off my foot. I knew something was seriously bad. The pain was really excruciating, and my partner carried me downstairs to the physiotherapy room. It was a bit of a mess because it was the very beginning of the season. Not many people were around. Kevin, now our director, then our general manager, then my partner again carried me out to the street, and we had to take a taxi to the hospital. There was so much construction going on because Thames Water was redoing pipes that it took us about over half an hour to get to the hospital. I mean, it was really not a good situation, and the diagnosis took a little bit long to make. I think they saw that the Liz Frank was injured, but they didn't see the other breaks because they were quite clean breaks, which was good for me that there was no displacement. But I didn't really find out that I would have to have surgery until the following day, I think. Anyway, 2 days later I had to have surgery. I had to have a pin put in the foot, and of course, as soon as I Googled Liz Frank joint, I found out that Liz Frank was the physician for Napoleon who identified it as a good place to amputate the foot after a soldier was caught in the stirrup of his horse. If he was shot or injured, or stabbed or injured, and he fell out of his horse, his foot would stay in the stirrup and it would break. And to prevent gangrene, they would just amputate at this joint so that he wouldn't lose his whole leg or his life. So after Googling that, I was really in the depths of despair, to put it mildly. I mean, I was so depressed. I had surgery. This actually was also the day of the Large Hadron Collider starting in Switzerland at CERN. And I'm not one for superstition, but I do think that possibly that had something to do with my unfortunate accident. The rehabilitation took a long time. I was on crutches for 17 weeks. My leg completely atrophied. I had, almost no muscle tone. I had to have surgery again right before Christmas to take the pin in my foot out, and before then I could not put any weight on it. I actually went home to Boston, and I'm very glad I was able to be with my family then, because I was very, very depressed. It was an incredibly dark time. I didn't know really the prognosis. I wasn't sure if I would ever return to where I had been. I even saw a doctor in Boston at one point who said, well, who guaranteed you that you would be able to walk again the same? Not even just dance, he said that to me. And I was so crushed. But my very, very dear physiotherapist in Boston, who's known me since I was 13, she worked with me intensively. And then I also worked with an absolutely wonderful physiotherapist and a doctor from Ukraine who worked extensively with the Soviet Union sports teams, and then when he emigrated to the US, he's worked with many famous American athletes and Olympians, and he uses a water rehabilitation base. So he really, and my physiotherapist, got me back, and it was 9 months later, actually, that I was back on stage. So it took a long time, and it was horrible. It was really horrible. Watching dance when I was injured, I saw that there was a bigger reason to be performing, to be an audience member, and it's not to nitpick, and it's not to be watching these minute details that maybe 98% of the audience has no even idea that they exist. I believe that they make an important I believe that they have an important role to play in the structure of dance and in the caliber of a dancer. But even more important is to see joy, I think, and to see something that it changes you from when you've come into the theater to when you go out. You need to be in a different place. And either that's a place where you're, uplifted, or it might even be, a place that it's made you think about something differently, or it's made you experience something, or it's made you question something. But I saw that as the objective for me had changed, and I still am very critical of myself. But I think I realized that this career is very short, and I was already in the midst of a possibly career-ending accident, and was the reason that I wanted to get on stage again just to be unhappy with myself for not being perfect again? Or did I want to be on stage again because I actually did love, to dance? And I think thinking through that really helped me, I think, take a little bit of pressure off myself. And, just to say, like, here you are, you can stand in first position again. That's a big thing. After not even being able to put, any weight on your foot for months. So these small incremental steps that began to happen, had huge significance, even though they were still miles away from being able to be on point and do 32 fouettes. When I was even still on crutches, I would go for 3.5 hours to 4 hours to the pool, and I was doing intensive workouts there, and I would be on the exercise bike. I was allowed to be on the exercise bike with a walking boot on. I would do that for an hour or so. I mean, it was an all-day event, and I would even do Pilates with the boot on, and I would be doing Pilates lying down, and I would be doing anything I could. I had very long days, and when I was eventually able to put weight on my foot, then I would go for a long time. I think rehabilitation takes much longer, and it's a much more intensive process than just rehearsing and performing, because you're allowed to have breaks then. But when you're rehabilitating, you have a couple little breaks, but it's usually like one thing after another, after another, after another. So in many ways, it's much harder to come back than to just maintain. Okay. Luckily I didn't have pain again, because everything had healed. But what I didn't have was strength. So it wasn't too hard to keep myself from doing too much, because I actually wasn't able to do too much, because my muscles had been even though I was doing so much to try to stay fit, there's nothing the same as ballet. You can't do anything extra that will recreate ballet. Of course you can supplement it. Of course there's things that will help. But there's absolutely nothing, as you know, the same as actually doing ballet. You can't recreate the Bluebird solo by running in place. Nothing is the same as actually doing ballet. So I remember the first big ballet I came back to was Sleeping Beauty, and that was really, really hard. And it was so exhausting. And I remember even like wearing my heart rate monitor to check how hard it was, and it was so tough, even though I had been doing so much exercise trying to get, keep my heart rate around 185 or something. And then I finished the first solo once, and it was almost up to like 200. It was really bad. Pressure is a big factor, and you have to look happy, and you have to look tranquil. And when someone's playing a team sport, they can do anything they want with their face. They can be like that. We're not allowed to do that. We're not allowed to grimace. That's a big difference, I think. Coming back into a physical sport is also hugely different from coming back into an artistic an artistic style of physical exertion, if you see what I mean. Because in dance, we are doing things that are incredibly difficult and sometimes very taxing, yet we have to maintain and we have to emote and keep composure and keep an artistic and emotional quality that is in a continuity with the character or with the piece that we're doing. So that also changes the way that your body reacts to exertion, and your body reacts to stress, and the way that you internalize that. And a lot of that is your mental ability to calm yourself down. But that's something that you have to get used to after you've been injured. You have to reacquaint yourself with that. I am very glad I took this path, because I think it's a unique gift for us to do something that we enjoy and that we find so fulfilling. Of course it's difficult, but I would never want to be in a position where I would have been thinking, what would it have been like to do that? And I am doing what I always wanted to do and what I dreamed of doing. And I've never been someone who was dealing with injuries so often that I'm in pain every day. I'm not in pain every day. I have had a few major injuries, but if I were in pain every day, then I don't think I would. I think that would change my relationship with what I do. I really love what I do, and of course you have niggles here and there, but I think it's there's the physical discomfort, I think, is something that humanity had to deal with for so many years, and now we expect to be absolutely comfortable all the time. And I don't think that's something that's just guaranteed. I think there's something kind of heroic in an exertion and in a performance that's so uses all of your energy and uses all of your emotion, and at the end, to feel empty in a way, but you've given it to the audience and you've given it yourself to the public, and to have that appreciation. And some people really they enjoy so much, not even just enjoy, but they're so moved by performances that they'll write a letter, or they'll tell you after the show how much they enjoyed it, and I think it does make you feel like you've given something. Even though if you haven't given someone a life and you haven't saved anyone's life, without culture and without art, we're missing a huge part of what makes people human, and what makes civilization interact, and what makes interpersonal relations so important to us, and that's through stories, and that's what ballet does in many ways.